Welcome to Verify Infield, the Millwork podcast. Your host, Jacob Edmond, CEO of Ductworks, will be interviewing experts in the industry to bring you insights and knowledge about the latest trends, techniques, and challenges in millwork. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, this podcast is for you. So sit back, relax, and join us as we explore the world of millwork. Here's Jacob.
Thanks, Chad, for joining us today. We've got Chad Foster, who is president of Gator Millworks in Louisiana, and is joining us today to talk about contracts in the millwork industry. Thanks for joining today, Chad.
Thanks for having me on, and I look forward to having this conversation with you.
Yeah. Before we dive into today's topic, though, can you share a bit about your background and how you got to where you are today as president of Gator Millworks?
So I'm actually in my 25th year here at Gator Millworks currently. My father started the company 28 years ago. I guess 19 years ago, I became an owner of the company. Once my father got ill and took in his reins, and I've always enjoyed what I did, work with him in the summers. I remember I was 13 years old going out with in summer times, 14 years old working with him in a wood shop. So I guess it grabbed me early. I've always enjoyed what I've done.
Awesome. And I assume you've seen Gator Millworks has changed a lot in your 25 years there, but the whole time has been based in Louisiana. Is that right?
That's correct. We've been here. We've been in two facilities. I guess you could say three, but always in Louisiana, never anywhere else.
Yep. And you guys primarily focus on commercial architectural millwork?
We're actually, I guess you could say, a hybrid company in my mind. Is that we started off 28 years ago as a residential face frame cabinet company. That's what my father started, and that was what we still do that work today. But we never got really away from it 100%. So we mixed it in with our production years ago, and this has its challenges, but we're a shop that does both. So face frame and frameless casework, finishing as well.
Which in our industry is pretty rare, right? Usually shops niche down and focus on one or the other for the most part for a number of reasons, but one of which I would assume is very applicable to what we're going to talk about today with contracts, because they can look very different, I assume, depending on the type of work.
They're definitely different. In the residential market, most of the time there isn't any. It's a handshake. And while that's also a great thing at times, it also can be bad. And then the flip side, the other direction is you can get 55 pages of something and then never do the job. It's really, you kind of pick and choose what risk is there.
Getting into that and talking about contracts today, I think it'd be good to give our listeners a bit of an overview. So for those that either maybe aren't familiar with the contract side of our business, can you give a brief overview of what millwork contracts look like today in the industry, why this topic is so important and frankly, a little bit complex and scary for some people?
Yeah. The one thing that I think that we as a millwork industry should take more awareness of is speaking more about being released further and sooner, holding back the time, which that's the risk. The least amount we get, that's the more risk we get. The longer that whoever's holding the project holds that work before they release it, they have that risk, but as soon as you sign that paper, it's transferred 100%. So time is of the essence. I think we can do more of asking for faster releases so we don't have that risk transfer, because it doesn't take but one word that could really change how a paragraph is written in the contract. And I think that's what I've had experiences with that. We still have them. So it's something that I think it's going to continue to get harder, I feel, with the way contracts are written and how fast jobs got to go.
And so for those maybe who listen who aren't familiar, we're talking today essentially about North America, not just US based contracts. And in this industry, mostly on the commercial side, millworkers are getting contracts as subcontractors of the general contractor or the prime contractor generally. And so in the US, and correct me anywhere I'm off base here, but you've got a general contractor who gets the prime contract with the client. And they then subcontract pretty much all the trades out to subcontractors. So everything from the grading to the framing to the drywall to the millworkers, right? And the millworkers generally are one of the last trades in. And also, as such, they're one of the last trades, as you mentioned, released on that contract. They might come, those GCs, a lot of times might come to the millworker in the bid process for pricing purposes, and kind of their bidding the job. And so a lot of times mill workers will help by giving them prices, and everything by and large is competitively bid, meaning multiple subs for every trade are bidding. So as mill workers, when we're bidding against jobs, we're bidding against other mill workers that are trying to get the same job, right? But at the end of the day, ultimately that GC, that general contractor or prime contractor is awarding the contract usually to one mill worker, or at least that scope. They might break it up if it's a very large job. And like for a stadium, for example, one mill worker might get the suites, another one might get the common areas, another one might get offices and back of house or something like that, just because of scale. But that scope ultimately is defined in your contract, and you get it. And in that, what are some of the most common things in a mill worker's contract? Obviously, you've got scope of work. Talk about what that looks like. Time. Okay. So schedule, as well as the terms, how much you're going to get paid. And I think for most of the people in our industry, unless they're the ones signing the contracts and they're involved in sales, or they're an owner, they're probably never really involved in this side of the business. And I think this is foreign to a lot of people.
Whoever estimated that project, they do get to review that contract. They may not understand it. They could be a month onto the job, but they're going to see that language, so we can also educate, inform. Those same people understand the project more too. So when that scope gets listed inside that contract, they're helping us understand as a team, what is it to confirm that we have everything covered. Let's review that.
A lot of times it's the things that aren't explicitly outlined in there that bite you, I assume, right? Because sometimes I've seen contracts that can be as simple as all casework, countertops, everything in these rooms, basically, right? And the less explicit and detailed it is, a lot of times the worse it is for the mill worker. It's just as much the same. And I think a lot of people in our industry, engineers, shop guys, project managers even, sometimes don't realize this. They see our internal scope and our internal bid, and they see all the itemized breakdowns. But the contract can a lot of times just be a single line item. Hey, $1 million. That's what you get. And it includes all this stuff, right? Are those things that you've evolved, how you guys make sure your contracts are written?
Yeah, we go through it very heavy, and we do see every bit of that. The language about time is one of the ones that we focus a lot on because of what you said of what us coming in late. That is, I say late, meaning the last 60, 90 days of that job. It takes time for shop drawings. We have to all factor that in, and also the review of the shop drawings. How long does that take? Factoring all those durations for all the steps, not even the production you have to do. And that's all contingent upon material procurement. And that goes back to one of the biggest things that we see in this industry is that it's the term TBD. TBD gets used a lot on material selections during bids. It's very difficult for us as mill workers to provide a price to an owner or to a GC who has the term TBD on something that, how do you price that? You can give a range, but that's not very easy to do.
And to make sure everybody understands how that can play out. For example, you could sign a contract that says you're providing all the casework with the laminate finish TBD, or even just finished TBD, right? But you're signing a contract with a already determined price, for example. So what you're essentially, if you proceed with that, what you're signing up for is saying, hey, I'm providing cabinets with a finish that I don't know what it is yet, or how expensive it's going to be, or how available it's going to be. But I'm telling you the price I'm going to charge you, regardless of how much it's going to cost me as the mill worker. And two, I'm possibly signing up for a schedule that I don't have a lot of control over. And so some of the things that can come from that are liquidated damages, right? Of, hey, we're now not meeting our contract that said we were going to be done within a time frame, but we're unable to do it because of the trades before us, or because of material lead times or something.
The biggest thing I see when that happens is the LDs, they do happen, obviously, but it's the what it does to the pressure of the people, your staff. That's where it really hurts the most, is that because that contractor needs you on the next job. It's important to work these details out as much as you can early, so you can try to work that plan early. I just think asking more questions, as us as mill workers, and we try to do our best at that, of trying to clarify details.
Even if you don't get into liquidated damages, you're inflating your costs if you're either having to work overtime or having to expedite a schedule internally, and you're not able to run your own optimized processes. A lot of times due to, hey, things you can't control. That we're not getting approved drawings back from the client or from the GC. We're not getting approved finishes. we're missing milestones that affect the schedule without maybe even recourse or ability to push back on them, right? Depending on how you
Yeah.
sign that contract.
Yeah. And that's the part where I think it has to be more conversations in pre-construction to have time to prepare to do all that. Cause it can't be that you've priced the job, you wait a couple of weeks, it could be a month before you hear back. It could be 2 months.
Right.
And then they want to have immediate shop drawings within 2 weeks. That sometimes is a problem, which is challenging. So
Yeah.
especially with TBD. So
Yeah, because you might be doing shop drawings with that information unavailable, and it can impact the design if they change from laminate to a veneer, or if they change from something even more significant from laminate countertops to solid surface or quartz. But it definitely affects lead time on the ability to source those materials. And a lot of times I imagine the clients are, at least in my experience, saying, okay, we've got approved drawings. You guys should be ready to build. But those are approved without those things clarified sometimes.
yeah, and I guess if it's not TBD, it could also be the secondary of that, which is why we want to provide this laminate, which could come from Pionite, Wilsonart, and it's full range. If it's full range, there's price points that's as much as, let's just say $1.50 all the way to $15 a square foot. That's huge dollars when you don't know what that is. And so if you're bidding it competitively, yes, someone takes the risk of guessing which one they're going to pick, but it's also that's the risk. I think that's risky for the client more than anything, because they're potentially taking in a project with someone that probably looking to cut corners potentially if they don't clarify what that item is to start.
Right. So in this, you've been, I assume now, being an owner for at least 19 years, working in the millwork in Gator for 25 or more. Are there any kind of big things you've encountered related to contracts that have been learning experiences that have changed how you do contracts going forward?
Yeah, I think there are, most definitely. Hoisting is one of them, going vertical. So when you're taking your work and you're having to make sure you put this in areas that you have installed, and it's to negotiate and make sure that how you're going to vertically get it there. It can be worded that it's on the millworker to provide all means of transportation for that.
Right.
And that's challenging. So that's one of the ones we really stress on when we get vertical jobs, because that's a lot of time. That's one area. How change orders are handled is another one. So I think that what can you charge for, how you charge for that, understanding what that process looks like with each. And that's the thing. Our process internally could be the same, but every client we do is differently because of their process. So it's important to understand how that team works.
Right.
Is a couple of them.
Yep. And what about things like terms and just billing? I know there's all of these things are big loaded topics that we can drill right into, but like low hanging fruit. So deposits, how does that generally work? And what are some things that you've changed and how you guys handle those or contract those?
I think we approach each one individually, case by case, like I mentioned before. And I think that when items are not on the shelf, when it's a laminate art that is being made, it's not something that's stocked. We've had great success by presenting that information to the GC and providing that information and getting that deposit during initial 30 days of a project at times. If you present in ways that how it secures their goods for the job, we've had some people push back, but a lot of times we just provide them with insurance certificates that have the shows that if they pay us for that product, something happens to it in our facility before it's there, it's covered. That's what they're looking for. Right. So I think that you can ask for that more on material deposits. We've had success with that.
And I imagine that's important because oftentimes you may be having to pay that deposit to your supplier. And two, if it's a made to spec item, but something that, hey, if they change the job, you're stuck with that material. And so it affects both your cash flow as well as your inventory and profitability on that job potentially.
Yeah. And one of the things that happens for us, once again, go back to when we go to these projects at the very end of a job. So our building cycles are usually the 25th of every month. So let's just say that you've been building on something for a month and now you're coming in the last 60 days of a job, your payment terms, the whole job could be finished before you get paid any dollars. Right. Depending on how you structure how you get paid, it's important because you take a big job, you may not get paid until the very end, and that's complete and that's risky.
And on that, I've seen there are contractors who may push even as much as paid when paid terms, meaning they're not going to pay you until they get paid by their client, which means you have no clue when you could get paid.
Yeah, but what you're correct. And what we do is everything we make is custom. It's not on the shelf. We're taking raw goods like any other millwork company is that's making architectural custom work. And that's got a value. It's not, we can't go to Home Depot and buy that stuff and put it in on the shelf. Like, we're one of the only trades that have to do what we do, which is manufacture it from raw goods.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a double edge for us as a mill worker, not like the plumber and electrician where they can buy goods in a supply house and go and install. It's a little bit easier.
Right.
That bigger challenges in front of them. Don't get me wrong. A lot of times, but it's just different for us at the end.
Right. A lot of everything regarding contracts, a lot of what we talked about can be very difficult for not only owners, but project managers and people to communicate and negotiate with GCs. It can be contentious and it can be very challenging. What are some of the things that you guys have found to help in managing these going forward, whether it be ongoing client relationships or just making this as successful as possible for both parties?
I think there's times where you're gonna walk away from something, and sometimes that could be damaging to a relationship. It can, but if you don't think about how damaging it can be on the other side, that's the downfall. So
Right.
I think presenting it in a professional way is the only way. You have to be able to talk about it. You have to be able to. If you don't ask, you never get told. It's nothing wrong with asking, in my mind. So I think that talking is the first step, and not just assuming.
Yep. And so I guess a little bit expanding on what you said also is not thinking about the other side. So being very conscious and aware of the kind of the consequences or repercussions of maybe just accepting these terms or feeling like, hey, there's nothing I can do about this could be very impactful in the business. Say you're accepting this contract that, hey, we need the work, we need the revenue, but based on the terms, it could be a deal breaker or to kill your business potentially.
There's no doubt. We've been in those situations where we've had to walk away from something and something we've been planning for a while. But at the end of the day, if it's what you feel is the best for the company, you have to do that no matter what the dollars may show, because it's too scary the other way. So I think that your efforts, how you've been in business, if you put those efforts towards going to achieve what you're working for, as hard as it may sound and feel at times, I think that if you look backwards on your history and what you've done, it's okay. I think just keep doing those things and don't worry that one job that you walked away from was going to be how do we do it?
Right.
So I think it's okay to do that.
Now, as an owner yourself and somebody that I assume is largely the buck stops with you on these contracts for Gator Millworks, what are some things that you've done over the years to educate yourself and be more equipped and informed to be able to successfully read, interpret, navigate, and set your company up for success with these contracts?
One of the ones, a couple of them, was talk with contractors. Maybe it's a different contractor that you have a really good relationship with, and not to disclose who it is you're referring to, but just language.
Right.
How can this be addressed? What is this normal? Is this something that could be addressed? I think that same thing with an architect. If you know someone who is an architect, especially if they understand contract administration, they can help guide that as well from that level, because it's the same way and it's a little bit higher up from the other direction. So I think that it's a huge gain for the whole industry if we could just work together and understand what the words mean. So
right.
You just got to ask, I think, questions and not just assume it.
Yeah. Do you also talk to other millwork company owners and other people like in your seat?
There's times that we reach out. We're in a small market here. We don't have as a Houston or an Atlanta market here. So the owners are a little further away. But yeah, bridging that gap out to talk to people is definitely a way of, and I'm open for that. So we have an open door here at Gator. So we all build a box, or whatever we build is unique, but I think that we can help each other if we would just speak to each other. And I think that we have to all do more, myself included. I just think that we get caught up in the work or the date or the moment, and it gets challenging. But at the end of the day, I think that mill workers will help each other at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So you just got to ask.
Are there things you have in your playbook now, or just that you keep in mind when you're negotiating maybe difficult terms that you're trying to, hey, negotiate something that the GC doesn't want to concede? Are there things that you use as, hey, we can concede this, or we can offer this in exchange for this? What are those pressure points, the things that are important for the GC that are compromises or things that you can offer back? Hey, we can't do this, but we can do this, and this adds value for the customer.
We don't get into what you could say a lot of the used card sales type of stuff. Like we're a relationship company. So we want to establish relationship early, and trust. And to do that, we have to communicate. But so to do that, we don't want to play, which you can say, a game. We want to understand how we can service you. And to do that, we want to be transparent. So if we see that there is an issue, it goes back to what we can say politely, we don't think this is a fit and this is why. So sometimes that they will come back and say, how can we make this work? And we'll work with that. But we all have hard lines to draw in the sand, which is also the contractor, the architect, the developer, the owner, and some of the subs.
Right.
And I think that we have to be able to do that. And we have recently had to say, look, someone was upset that we backed away from estimating a job. We had to explain, we made a decision based off of our resources. I'm sorry that we wasn't able to provide the quote. We just didn't have the means at that time to do it. And we just want you to respect that.
Right.
So I think communication is so huge, and just ask why. So I think that's the biggest thing of negotiation you can do is to speak. Yes, you're going to have to send things written to clarify and to verify what it is that was agreed upon. Words are important.
Right. So ultimately communicating, understanding what it is that they are needing and how is it something that is a fit for what you guys can provide.
Yeah. And when that time, because it's always going to be the time. And the least we get as an industry, it's the hardest thing to overcome because it's the hardest thing when we're buying all these raw goods, as mentioned earlier, to produce that product. It's not buying it off that shelf. And I think that's the thing that has to be said early. When I've said those words is that, look, I'm not saying there's not other trades on the job that don't do what we do, but can you understand this from our side? And they said, we never saw it that way. They just never knew and understood it as, yeah, you got to buy this material and make it. I can see where the time needs to come in at.
Are there trends or things you've noticed that have evolved, maybe even like over the last few years with the pandemic, that have changed the dynamic or even just the content of how contracts and millwork are things you're seeing?
Yeah, I think that it's changed a lot because there's been so much change in staff all over the country. So I think that millwork firms, contracting firms, architectural firms have had changes. And so new staff brings in new ideas, which a lot of times are good, but also painful and can be expensive. So I think that that's the trend I see is a lack of experience in each of these industries. So I think that the protection with what language and contracts is going to be even more so because of certain people that don't have as much experience as someone who did have it. Now the company needs to protect themselves more. So I think that understanding contract is something very important for going into the future.
Right. It seems like ultimately a lot of this boils down to how rushed or much pressure does an owner in their position, what are their motives for signing a contract? And a lot of the bad contracts or accepting bad terms comes from a couple things. We talked a lot about information and being informed about contracts, understanding what terms mean and what you want to accept, what you don't. But on the flip side, or not the flip side, but related to that, the other thing seems to maybe come from how much do they feel they need this revenue, this job? And sometimes we as mill workers or owners might feel like, hey, if I don't take this job, I don't know when the next one's going to come that's going to fill this bucket in my shop. And talking about that, like as an owner, we're talking about contracts, but there's this whole other dynamic of running the rest of your business in a way that you are equipped with the information, the knowledge, and to not be put in that position of feeling like I have to take this contract that I don't want, but my business is going to suffer if I don't. Does that make sense?
It makes 100% sense. That's us being so diversified, and we want to continue to be diversified. It's not because we're not committed to our industry. Mm-hmm. We're committed to what we can control, which is us. Mm-hmm. So I think that having more opportunities of manufacturing things, we just don't make casework. I think having that diversification is great. So residential, commercial mix is always a plus. It's challenging. So that's my view on it.
What about even just from the capacity planning or cash flow planning? I know you guys are at a scale now where I'm sure you have systems in place where you're constantly understanding, hey, what does my capacity look like this month, next month, 6 months out, as well as what revenue do I have to plan cash flow? Those are two very important factors, I would imagine. And we talked a lot about the importance of schedule with contracts, right? And how that overlays, not just for the client, but for you in your business. And I would imagine there's a lot of maybe smaller shops or newer owners that maybe don't have systems in place to have that information, that data readily available. How important is that?
It's important. One thing I can say, the biggest one I can say is having just being liquid as much as you can be. So that way, if you don't have those systems in place, having the cash flow to back yourself on something that could be a 2 months slowdown,
right?
Have the ability to take care of those. And I know that's not easy for everyone to do, but it's a goal that I think everyone should be aiming towards on your business, is that what's that look like if something gets ugly? And I guess for us in South Louisiana, we get hurricanes every 6 weeks. The disasters come, so you're easier to plan for things and change. So I think that having that backlog of liquidity is going to be important for companies to make that decision of, well, this job's not right for us. We're not feeling pressured in it. We can take the next 2 weeks and let's see what's on the market and see what we can pick up.
Right. First, you would say is that even if you don't maybe have your capacity planning dialed in, having that liquidity gives you that cushion to understand, hey, even if something happens and I don't have work for my people for this bucket of time, I know I'm not going to have to completely go out of business.
And then reaching out to and networking with people, asking how you can maybe be a resource for them on some backflow or some backlog work for them. So I think that there's just different ways to approach it, so you don't have to put yourself in that position or the company in a position that could be horrible for eternity. Different ways to approach it. I think the first step for us was always to be as strong as on the bank statements you could be.
And then as far as capacity, and I even still struggle with this in what I do now, but a lot of times if you just look at operations, a lot of times your production team will be saying, oh, we're swamped, we're busy, stop selling. And there is that internal struggle, I imagine, of, okay, how do I take the information and everybody's giving me? But also that can happen. And then a week later, they could be saying, hey, we're about to run out of work, and you've shut off your funnel potentially. How do you navigate that? Are there any kind of thoughts you have or best practices there?
Our approach is, when that happens, we usually have internal work that we want to work on ourselves with. So we'll have some special projects we're working on that we'll show for us that we're maybe R&D and developing something for ourselves. But that's one way that we have done it. I guess once again, we're custom. So It really, those moments of time when it happens, it's hard to say when the pivot comes.
Right.
But I really challenge everyone to be okay with making that pivot. We can be different than what we've always been.
Are there, so in millwork, obviously you're always competing with other millworkers, right? If you're not getting the job, somebody else is, and vice versa, right? But additionally, I imagine that affects the type of, with regard to contracts, the terms and things in there. If every other millworker but Gator is accepting these terms and you're not, the GCs are going to continue to put those in their contracts and expect you to take them, right? Are there things like that you think are still only exist because so many people just accept them?
Explain this a little bit further, what you mean.
Like a lot of times in our industry, right, the contracts are favorable towards the GC, the prime contractor, more so than the millworker, right?
That's who's writing it. So yes.
Yeah. And there's probably terms in there that maybe your competition just thinks, hey, I don't have a choice, I have to accept this, but you're successfully pushing back on. And if tomorrow all millworkers decided, hey, we're just not going to accept contracts with 10% retention anymore, would that make a difference? Are there things like that as an industry we could change?
I think that our voice can change a lot if we do it together. I think that voice can be done and it's just respectfully to say, look, we as an industry, we can't continue to survive this way, which is, it's to be looked at so last on a project when it's one of the biggest interior items of a job that people see. I think that we have to do this and just change. Bridging the network with information is powerful, and how that gets done exactly, I don't know that answer, but I think it starts with something like this, at least have an open conversation.
Shifting gears a little bit on you again. So with respect to contracts, I imagine every company may do things a little bit different internally, like who's involved in reviewing contracts. Does anybody review contracts? Is it just the owner? Tell us a little bit about what does your process look like internally, and maybe how it's evolved over the years as far as who's involved in reviewing, what types of things happen from the time a contract is sent to you to sign?
Obviously, I'm involved. Our estimation team, project management is also involved, especially who's going to be running it, to have input. We look at who that is we're working for to understand what we have done in the past. So I think that it starts with us. We want to try to resolve and get this done as quickly as possible. Sometimes that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
It could be where it sits on our desk for a little bit too long. And I think the longer it sits, though, the harder it does become to negotiate some of those terms because you sat on it. So
Right.
I think that the sooner that we can all work towards getting it complete, it's the best for the client. It's the biggest thing. That's how we approach it, is to let's get everybody together. Let's see what this is. We mark it up internally. We'll pass it around 2 or 3 different people. As a rule, bringing in attorneys is not always the best thing to do because they're going to point out risk everywhere.
Right.
So I think that makes things a lot longer to get solved. I think that you have to work things out and see how that goes with each project and client.
Right. And so are there specific kind of things you're really honing in on when you're reading through a contract? What are some of the red flags or just things that you're making sure, hey, I want to make sure, what does this say? What does this say? And things that pop up more often than others?
Yeah. When's our completion time? And I'm going to go backwards from there. So if substantial completion is 90 days from now and we start looking at long lead material items, that's one of the triggers that we're either going to have to go negotiate that very early to say, we can't do this and make the change or go a different direction. That's one. I guess it's hard to say. I guess I'm drawing a blank now.
Yeah, completion time. You talked earlier a little bit about change orders, how that works.
The staff too, of who you're working with, I
Okay.
think also is a huge approach. So having who that project management is for that general contractor, who that superintendent's going to be, I think all that makes a difference of that relationship of knowing, well, they're going to press me hard on something that's in this contract. I think that's also an important thing to know who you're working with.
Right. Payment terms, billing cycles, that type of things you can bill for. Are there things like that you're highlighting in there?
Yeah, the materials goes back to those material deposits. I think that you really have to start requesting these things. But just about everything we do in our industry is custom. You may buy some white sheet stocks and birch plywoods, but as a rule, everything's pre-laid or made to order. So I think that we have to ask for these things, and you're going to have to turn over documentation that you have these items. I guess that's the other thing, is be prepared for providing more information to do that. And that's been sometimes hard for people not wanting to give up the cost of what something is. And it's understandable that if someone asks you for an invoice that backs up what you're billing for, you be prepared to show them what the cost is.
Right. Awesome. I know a lot of what we've talked about probably sounds very like negative or cautious or problematic, right? But it doesn't have to be, obviously, right? Are there any positive trends or highlights or things? Because you've been dealing with contracts for many years. I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes over the last 20 years and how they're done, how they're written. What are some positive changes you've seen over that time, or things that are trends you're seeing?
Positives is hard, I guess you can say, just because it seems like they just get bigger. So more review, longer reviews. So that's the challenging part. So I don't know that they've gotten better. They've just gotten covering for risk. And I think and I understand and respect it for both sides.
Right.
And I think that everyone needs to try to do that. And I don't know that it's gotten better. And I can think that's probably going to get tougher because of the unknowns that's out there with material allocations and everything that still happens. It's challenging for us. It's hard. It's not easy. We all know that.
Do you have any specific advice for professionals that are starting to be dealing with contracts, either on behalf of their owner or even just other owners that are dealing with this, and maybe they're where you were 10 or 15 years ago? Just advice on how they can move forward and make this something that is not terrifying.
Talk through it internally. That's one of the first steps too, is get that team together. If you read something in that contract, identify that, mark it, come back to it with the team, discuss those thoughts. If there's further thoughts on that, bring it to a higher level professional to do that, whether it's an attorney, whether it's another contractor that's a relationship, or an architect firm that you may have a relationship with. I think there's so many avenues that we can all do and ask for guidance and help. It's communication. It's one of the biggest things of success, what we all do every day. And it's one of the hardest things we struggle with.
So shifting gears a little bit, we've talked a lot about contracts. I think there's a lot of good information here for many people. And some people that are listening, this might be totally foreign, but hopefully opens up a new side of the business that not everybody gets exposed to or gets to see, but is very important. Is really one of the, if not the most important. So there's two questions I like to ask every guest, and I'm really interested to talk to you about the future of the industry in general. And so the first one is, what do you see changing in our industry over the next 5 to 10 years?
I see the age continuing to get younger. I think that's a great thing in a lot of ways, but it's going to require a lot of training.
Mhm.
I think that getting involved with the youth, every company needs to do this as much as possible. Internships, very critical. So I think that training the youth, training even whoever it could be. So I think that that's the one thing I can see is the lack of amount of people that we can have in our industry, which is an amazing industry, and the technology. I think the technology has changed so much in the last, say, 20 years, and it's even getting faster now with the AI. So, what that does, what that's going to do coming, who knows? But I think that, getting involved with technology, training, that's mine.
Yeah. Awesome. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Actually, the episode that just came out today, I was with Mark Smith, and he works teaching the trades. And so he teaches high school, and he talked a lot about the average age in our industry. There's a lot of different figures, but it's upper 40s, if not lower 50s, probably.
Ours is younger than that.
In your company?
We're about mid 30s.
Yeah, it's good. And that's really the way it was that way at one point, and has to trend that way, right? We've got to bring new talent, younger talent into the industry.
Sometimes that means more talent, more staff than you need. And when that happens, putting that person with that mentor is very critical. Explaining what needs to happen with that is critical.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it definitely has to be something that is conscious and intentional within your organization that you are planning for, and not just, oh shoot, this person's retiring or has left and now we got to backfill, and it's a last minute thing.
And the thing with that is that it may take 2 years for an example to come up. So when that training comes up, it may take for that situation that someone knows how to teach. It may not happen for 2 years. Getting that person involved with some of those things in the early process is important.
Yep. So on the flip side, we talked about what do you think will change? What do you see staying the same in our industry over the next 5 to 10 years?
We're all going to make dust. Man, staying the same. Let's say it's a tough one. I look at so much that's changing anyway, so it's hard for me to say that it's going to stay the same, but I don't know, man. I don't see it that way. I don't know. I don't see it. I guess other than goes back to cutting the dust in the wood, but I just always see things that's got to change. It's the only constant we have in life is change. So I think it's blinders for ourselves.
Awesome. Is there anything we didn't get to that you think is important that we share on this topic, or that you wanted to share with our listeners?
Only thing I'd like to say is that obviously thank you, Jacob, for having me on first. And what you do for our industry is amazing. I think these podcasts provide information to people that may not ever get to have that information. So I think that's helpful. And the first thing, thank you for that. And just, I think the other thing is that everyone to know to reach out to me, contact us. We'd be glad to help if we can. I think that more people doing that, bringing that connection of people is a positive.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. And I appreciate that. And that's something I've appreciated. You've been a contact and a resource for me, and will continue to lean on people like you in the industry. And I think it's exciting to see, even just from when I first got in the industry, how many more resources and people there are. And I think that historically it's been a very almost secretive or reclusive industry. Everybody keeps to their, like, this is what we're doing. And that's changing with owners like you. I think are changing that dynamic in our industry and sharing more. It's easier to contact each other. But yeah, definitely we'll be putting your LinkedIn at least in the show notes. And if people do want to reach out to you, is that the best way, or how should people find out more about Gator and Chad?
Shoot me a message. I think my email should be on there as well. That's another way that you can reach me. Feel free to look us up on the website. That's another way as well. So I think reach out and just know that there's always a hand that potentially can help you if you ask.
Yeah.
So you never get an answer if you don't.
Yeah, definitely. We'll put your contact in, as well as Gator Millworks. And for anybody that's interested, go check out Gator Millworks. We'll put the links in our show notes. They're on pretty much all the socials, LinkedIn, Instagram. I know you guys share a lot of great content, and the things you guys are doing is very helpful.
Yeah. And that's another thing of content. It's a whole nother discussion of what you can do to promote yourself and engagement of the youth and technology is producing content. And to me, there's no bad content. You just got to put content out.
Awesome. We'd love to have you on at some point, and maybe we can talk about that.
We got some neat in common. I look forward to it too.
Awesome. I appreciate you taking the time and sharing your insights and your knowledge with us, and look forward to having you on again in the future, Chad.
Same here, Jacob. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Do you want to stay up to date about industry insights, new content, and our community of millworkers? Go to ductworksmw.com to sign up for our newsletter. I'll see you in the next episode of Verify in Field.